My name is Sophia, and I'm 28 years old. I never thought a simple family dinner would change everything. When my father declared, "You're a failure for life," across our mahogany dining table, everyone froze. They expected tears, maybe anger. Instead, I laughed. The shock on their faces when I responded, "Priceless." That night redefined everything. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're from. Hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that might just change your perspective too. I grew up in a family where success wasn't just encouraged, it was expected. My father, Thomas, built his marketing firm from scratch into a regional powerhouse through sheer determination and what he called strategic excellence. With his perfectly tailored suits and commanding presence, he measured everything in life by its return on investment, including his children. Excellence is a habit, not an achievement. He would remind us over breakfast, dinner, and any moment in between when our focus seemed to waver. His office walls displayed framed magazine features celebrating his business acumen, and he referenced them in conversations as casually as others might mention the weather. My mother, Diana, had been a promising architect before meeting my father. She'd won a prestigious scholarship in college and had dreams of designing sustainable community spaces. After marriage, those dreams gradually transformed into managing our household with the same precision she once applied to blueprints. She became the perfect corporate wife, hosting dinner parties where my father could expand his network and maintaining a home that could be featured in design magazines. "Your father works so hard for this family," she would whisper whenever I questioned the emotional temperature in our home. "Sometimes great men need space for their greatness." Her eyes would drift toward her small office in the corner of our basement, where dusty design sketches remained in locked drawers. My older brother Jackson was everything my father wanted in an heir. 3 years my senior, he graduated top of his class from Wharton, played varsity lacrosse, and had the natural charisma that made him the perfect future face of the family business. He absorbed my father's philosophies like a sponge, repeating them in conversations as if they were his own revelations. "The market rewards value, not effort," he would tell me when I complained about my father's impossible standards. "Dad's just preparing us for the real world." But the "us" in that sentence always rang hollow when his achievements were celebrated, while mine were dissected for flaws. My younger sister Amanda, 4 years my junior, found a unique position in our family dynamic. Her natural talent for painting and sculpture impressed even my father, who saw her artistic abilities as a charming addition to the family legacy rather than a threat to the business. "Creative types have their place," he would say proudly during gallery showings of her work. "Amanda's art will be the cultural philanthropy arm of our family enterprise someday." Our family dinners were like board meetings with food. From a young age, we took turns reporting our recent achievements, lessons learned from failures, and strategies for improvement. My father would nod approvingly at concrete metrics, test scores, competition rankings, networking connections made. Anything subjective or emotionally driven was categorized as interesting but immeasurable, his polite way of dismissing it as irrelevant. The pressure for academic perfection started early. When I brought home my first B+ in fifth grade math, my father spent 3 hours at the dining table reviewing every problem I'd missed. "Mediocrity is a choice, Sophia," he said, tapping his pen on each incorrect answer. "And it's not a choice we make in this family." Throughout high school, every achievement was shadowed by Jackson's previous accomplishments. When I was elected student council vice president, my father nodded and said Jackson was president by sophomore year, but this is a good start. When I won the state writing competition, he smiled tightly and said, "Creative writing is a nice hobby, but what marketable skills are you developing?" Writing had always been my passion. Words flowed through me in ways numbers and business strategies never would. My journals, filled with stories and observations, became my private sanctuary. When I was 16, I submitted a personal essay to a youth literary magazine without telling anyone. When it was published, I finally worked up the courage to show my father. "This is what you've been spending your time on?" he asked, flipping through the pages with a detached interest. "It's well written, I suppose, but where's the practical application? Jackson is already managing real client accounts at the firm on weekends." My mother squeezed my shoulder and said, "It's wonderful, honey. but later suggested I might consider communications or marketing as a practical application of my writing skills. By senior year of high school, I had internalized the family values enough to abandon my dream of studying literature or journalism. Instead, I applied to business schools with strong marketing programs, a compromise I thought would satisfy both my creative interests and my father's practical demands. Now you're thinking strategically, my father said when I announced my college plans. His approval felt like rainfall after a drought, and I mistook that momentary relief for happiness. For 4 years, I studied business concepts that never quite clicked naturally for me, working twice as hard as my classmates to maintain the GPA my father expected. I called home every Sunday to report my progress, receiving advice rather than emotional support. Network more, secure better internships, join more prestigious clubs. The instructions never ceased. Meanwhile, my journals collected dust as marketing textbooks took their place on my desk. The only writing I did was for class assignments and the occasional marketing copy for student organizations. My creativity withered under the fluorescent lights of business school classrooms, but I convinced myself this was adulthood, doing what was necessary rather than what I loved. When I graduated with honors, my father's handshake was firm, but his praise was measured. A solid foundation, he assessed. Now the real work begins. That night I overheard him telling Jackson, "She did better than I expected." Honestly, not everyone has your natural business instinct, but she compensated with hard work. Those words cemented my understanding of my place in our family hierarchy. I would always be measured against Jackson's natural aptitude and found wanting regardless of my efforts. This realization settled in my chest like a cold stone, and though I didn't recognize it, then it was the first crack in the foundation of my father's influence over me. After graduating with my business degree, I did exactly what was expected. I accepted a position at a reputable marketing firm. Not my father's company, as I wanted to prove I could succeed on my own merit, but a safe, respectable choice nonetheless. For 3 years, I created strategies for products. I didn't care about attended networking events that drained my energy and collected performance reviews that praised my attention to detail and solid execution without ever mentioning creativity or innovation. Every morning, I would stare at my reflection while applying the corporate appropriate makeup that was part of my professional armor. This is success, I would tell myself. This is what winning looks like. But the woman staring back at me looked more resigned than triumphant. My apartment filled with business books I dutifully read, but never loved professional clothes that fit perfectly, but felt like costumes, and a social circle of colleagues who knew the professional Sophia, but not the writer who still scribbled stories in hidden journals late at night. The breaking point came during a major campaign launch for a fitness company. My team had developed a strategy that followed every best practice and industry standard. It was safe-proven and utterly forgettable. During the client presentation, I watched their polite but underwhelmed expressions and felt something crack inside me. That night, I pulled out my dusty journals and read through years of stories, essays, and observations. The voice on those pages was alive in ways I hadn't felt in years. I stayed up until dawn writing for the first time in months. By morning, I had drafted a resignation letter and the outline for a blog focused on authentic personal development. Stories of people breaking free from external expectations to find their true calling. When I called my parents to share my decision, my mother's concern was immediate. "But you've worked so hard for this career, honey. Are you sure you want to throw that away?" My father was more direct. "This is impulsive and irresponsible. Everyone wants to follow their passion until the bills come due. This writing fantasy nearly derailed your education, and now you want it to derail your career too." Only my sister Amanda offered genuine support. "You've always been an amazing writer, Soph. I still have that story you wrote for my 10th birthday, about the girl who painted worlds into existence. It's the reason I applied to art school." I submitted my resignation the next day. My boss seemed more confused than disappointed. "You have a stable career trajectory here, Sophia. Creative pursuits are wonderful hobbies, but rarely sustainable professions." The echo of my father's sentiments in my boss's words only strengthened my resolve. I had spent years living according to others' definitions of success. It was time to discover my own. The first months were humbling. I applied for writing positions at major publications and received form rejections or no response at all. My blog gained a modest following but generated no income. My savings dwindled as I learned the harsh realities of freelance writing: irregular paychecks, competitive markets, and the constant hustle for the next opportunity. I interviewed for an editorial assistant position at a prestigious magazine, a role that paid half my former salary but represented a foot in the door of the publishing world. After 3 rounds of interviews and a writing test, I poured my heart into the rejection came via a generic email. While your background is impressive, we've selected candidates whose experience better aligns with our current needs. Meanwhile, my blog and podcast about authentic personal development slowly gained traction. I interviewed people who had made radical life changes to pursue meaningful work, shared research on happiness and fulfillment, and wrote honestly about my own struggles to define success on my own terms. My mother called weekly, her voice carefully neutral as she asked about my writing projects, though I could hear the worry she tried to conceal. My father communicated through her, never asking to speak to me directly but sending messages. Your father says there's an opening in the marketing department at Brenson Group if you're ready to be serious again. Jackson sent occasional texts that veered between condescension and genuine curiosity. Dad's been extra intense since you left the fold. Kind of impressive you had the guts to jump ship, even if it was crazy. How's the blog thing going anyway? Only Amanda visited my small apartment regularly, bringing takeout and genuine interest in my new life. Dad asked about your little writing hobby at dinner last night, she reported during one visit. I showed him your latest article about corporate burnout culture. He read the whole thing but didn't say anything. And 5 months into my new path, I received an opportunity that felt like validation. A small but respected online publication wanted to publish my personal essay about leaving a successful career to pursue meaningful work. They couldn't pay much, but the exposure would introduce my writing to a wider audience. The day after publication, the essay was shared widely across social media platforms. Comments poured in from people facing similar crossroads in their lives. Literary agents reached out expressing interest in a potential book expansion. For the first time, I felt my decision was not just personally fulfilling, but professionally viable. That same week, I pitched a major project to an independent publisher, a series of in-depth profiles of people who had redefined success after significant personal or professional setbacks. The concept resonated with their upcoming focus on authentic leadership and personal growth. The publisher requested a comprehensive proposal and sample chapters within 2 weeks. I worked day and night pouring everything I had learned about storytelling, authenticity, and resilience into the document. This was my chance to transform my writing hobby into a legitimate career. 3 days before the family dinner that would change everything, I received their response. While we appreciate the concept and your evident passion, we don't see sufficient market potential for this project at this time. Your platform isn't developed enough to support a book launch. The rejection hit harder than any before. I had invested not just my time and skills, but my deeply personal vision for what my work could contribute to the world. Reading between the lines of the rejection, the message was clear. You're not enough yet. You don't matter enough yet. Your voice isn't valuable enough yet. As I sat in my apartment surrounded by drafts of the rejected proposal, my phone chimed with a text from my mother. Monthly family dinner this Sunday at 6. Your father specifically asked that you attend. My first instinct was to invent an excuse. The thought of facing my family, especially my father, while processing this professional disappointment felt unbearable. They would see the rejection as confirmation of everything they had warned me about. I drafted several decline messages, but couldn't bring myself to send any of them. Running away would only reinforce the narrative that I had made a mistake. If I truly believed in the path I had chosen, I needed to own it completely, setbacks and all. With a mixture of dread and determination, I replied, I'll be there. The night of the family dinner arrived with a perfect spring evening that contrasted sharply with my internal weather system. I pulled into my parents' driveway 15 minutes early, needing a moment to compose myself before entering the performance that family gatherings had always been. The house looked exactly as it always had, impeccably maintained colonial with seasonal flowers perfectly arranged in symmetrical patterns. My mother refreshed the landscaping with mathematical precision, each plant placed to create what she called balanced visual harmony. Even nature in our family home adhered to strategic planning. I smoothed my dress, simple but professional armor for the battle ahead, and rang the doorbell rather than using my old key. This small act symbolized my new status visitor rather than resident adult rather than child. My mother answered with a warm but anxious smile. Sophia, you look thin, honey. Are you eating regularly? Her eyes scanned me for evidence of my supposedly struggling existence. I'm eating just fine, Mom. Cooking more, actually. It's creative and relaxing. I kissed her cheek and caught the familiar scent of her perfume, the same brand she'd worn since I was a child. The house smelled of pot roast and rosemary potatoes, my father's favorite Sunday meal. Mom had prepared comfort food, perhaps unconsciously hoping familiar flavors might smooth potentially rough conversational waters. In the living room, Jackson was already holding court, describing his recent business trip to Singapore. The market expansion potential is tremendous. Dad, the connections you made there last year opened every door. I'm presenting the full strategy at next week's board meeting, but early projections suggest 40% growth in the first year alone. My father nodded with satisfied pride. The relationships are critical. The Chang family remembers how we helped them during the banking crisis. Trust built during difficult times yields dividends for decades. Amanda sat quietly on the window seat, sketching in her ever-present notebook. She looked up when I entered, her face brightening. Sophia, I was starting to think you might bail. She crossed the room to hug me, whispering, Jackson's been humble bragging for 20 minutes straight. Save me. Sophia, my father acknowledged with a nod that managed to convey both greeting and assessment. You're looking well. The unspoken continuation hung in the air, despite your questionable life choices. The prodigal daughter returns, Jackson said with a smirk. How's the blogging business, making millions yet with those inspirational quotes? Before I could respond, my mother announced dinner was ready. I've made all your favorites, Sophia. The roast, those scalloped potatoes you loved in high school, and chocolate mousse for dessert. The dining room table was set with the formal china used for important occasions. My mother had placed me directly across from my father, rather than in my usual spot beside Amanda. A strategic decision that allowed him full view of my reactions throughout the meal. Amanda has exciting news, my mother said as she served the salad course. Tell them, sweetheart. Amanda tucked her hair behind her ear, a nervous habit from childhood. My series on urban decay and renewal has been selected for the Emerging Artist Showcase at the Palmer Gallery. It's a pretty big deal. Only 10 artists from the entire state were chosen. That's incredible, I said, genuinely thrilled for her. The Palmer has an amazing reputation. I'm so proud of you. My father nodded approvingly. The arts patronage connections will be valuable. Many corporate board members and potential clients attend those functions. Jackson, we should coordinate with marketing to sponsor the exhibition. Corporate cultural engagement has excellent ROI for client relationships. Amanda's accomplishment immediately transformed into a business opportunity. I caught her eye across the table and saw the familiar flicker of disappointment quickly masked with practical acceptance. Your sister's talent has practical applications, my father continued. Creative pursuits can be valuable when properly channeled into marketable outputs. The subtext was clear, unlike my writing, which he viewed as an impractical indulgence. So Jackson, my mother interjected clearly, attempting to keep conversation in safe territory, tell us more about the Singapore expansion. For the next 20 minutes, Jackson detailed his business triumphs, client acquisitions, and strategic insights. My father interjected with approving questions and occasional advice. My mother nodded along, asking questions that demonstrated her absorption of business terminology over decades of such conversations. Amanda silently ate while sketching ideas on her napkin. Another childhood habit my father had long ago stopped trying to correct once he recognized her artistic talent as exceptional. When Jackson finally concluded his professional report, my father turned his attention to me with the same expression he used when addressing underperforming employees. And what about you, Sophia? It's been, 5 months since you left Burton Marketing. What's the latest with your writing endeavors? The table fell silent. This was the moment everyone had been anticipating with varying degrees of dread and curiosity. I took a deliberate sip of water, buying seconds to organize my thoughts. I had promised myself I would be honest without being defensive, confident without being arrogant. It's been a significant learning experience, I began. I've built my blog to 15,000 monthly readers, launched a podcast that's been featured in New Media Monthly's Voices to Watch list, and just published my first paid piece with The Modern Perspective last week. I deliberately led with my achievements before addressing the recent setback. I also recently pitched a book project to Horizon Publishing. They declined the current concept but provided valuable feedback for future submissions. My father's expression remained unchanged. 15,000 readers, and the monetization strategy. What's the revenue model? I'm in the platform building phase, I explained. Revenue comes from freelance pieces, speaking engagements at writing workshops, and consulting with small businesses on authentic brand storytelling. The podcast will be sponsored starting next month. Jackson snorted softly. So basically, you're making what, a quarter of your old salary, less. My expenses are lower too, I countered. And I'm building something that belongs to me with unlimited growth potential. My father set down his fork with precise control. The slight movement silenced the table more effectively than a shout. Sophia, he said in the measured tone he used when delivering what he considered irrefutable logic, you were on a clear trajectory at Burton. Senior marketing strategist by 30, potential director role by 35. Benefits retirement planning, professional respect. Instead, you're cobbling together gigs while writing a blog that generates no significant income. He took a sip of wine before continuing. Everyone at this table wants you to succeed. That's why we're concerned when we see you chasing adolescent dreams instead of building a sustainable adult life. My work is meaningful to people, I said, feeling the familiar tightening in my chest that his disapproval always triggered. I receive messages every day from readers who found clarity or courage through my writing. Messages don't pay rent, Jackson interjected. Neither does misery, I replied. I was dying inside at Burton, creating marketing campaigns for products nobody needed, chasing metrics that measured everything except what matters. What matters is responsibility. My father said, his voice hardening. What matters is building something lasting rather than chasing momentary feelings. Your brother understands this. Even Amanda has found a way to make her creative interests professionally viable. Amanda stared at her plate, clearly uncomfortable being used as a counterexample. I'm not irresponsible, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I'm investing in skills and connections that align with my values. The financial returns are growing steadily. Growing from zero is easy, Jackson muttered. My father leaned forward slightly. Let's be direct, Sophia. You had a respected position that you abandoned for a writing hobby that any objective assessment would classify as financially unsuccessful. Your mother and I supported your education to prepare you for professional success, not to fund what amounts to an extended adolescent rebellion. The familiar shame and doubt began creeping in, the lifelong conditioning to measure my worth through his metrics. I gripped my napkin under the table, reminding myself of the messages from readers whose lives had been impacted by my work, the growing opportunities that validated my path. My work has value beyond financial metrics, I said quietly. My father's laugh was short and dismissive. Everyone who fails says that. He looked around the table as if seeking allies. Jackson smirked while my mother and Amanda studied their plates. The hard truth, Sophia, he continued with the certainty of someone delivering irrefutable wisdom, is that you're a failure for life if you continue down this path. This writing fantasy will leave you dependent on others or crawling back to the career you abandoned, but with years of professional growth lost. The words hung in the air like a pronouncement. You're a failure for life. Not just currently struggling, not just making mistakes, but permanently, irrevocably defective. I saw Jackson's mouth twitch with suppressed amusement. A cousin who had joined us for dinner coughed uncomfortably, but then chuckled slightly, perhaps to align himself with my father's assessment. My mother's face flushed with embarrassment or disagreement. I couldn't tell which. Amanda looked at me with eyes wide in shock, a silent apology in her expression. In that moment, something inside me shifted. I felt the weight of decades of judgment, the crushing pressure of misaligned expectations, the futility of seeking approval from someone who fundamentally couldn't see the value in my choices. And in that clarity, I found not anger or hurt, but a strange, liberating amusement at the absurdity of it all. The dining room hung in tense silence after my father's declaration. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for the tears or defensive anger that usually followed his harsh judgments. The familiar pressure built in my chest, that mixture of shame, rage, and desperate desire for approval that had defined so much of my life. But something different happened this time. As I looked at my father's confident, dismissive expression, so certain of his right to define my worth, I felt a bubble of laughter rise in my throat. Not nervous laughter or wounded laughter, but genuine amusement at the sudden recognition of how arbitrary his definition of success truly was. Before I could stop myself, I laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a full, authentic laugh that echoed against the formal dining room walls. The shocked expressions around the table only made me laugh harder. My father's face transformed from smugness to confusion, to the beginning traces of anger. My mother froze with her water glass halfway to her lips. Jackson's smirk disappeared, replaced by bewilderment. Only Amanda showed a hint of delighted surprise in her wide eyes. "I'm sorry," I said, finally containing my laughter, but not my smile. "But that's genuinely funny to me now." "You find your future amusing?" My father asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "No," I replied, feeling strangely calm and clear. "I find it amusing that I've spent 28 years believing you were the expert on what constitutes failure and success in life." I turned to face him directly. "Dad, you're absolutely right that I'm not succeeding by your metrics. But here's what's interesting. You're actually an expert on failure, just not in the way you think." The color rose in his face. "Excuse me. You've built a successful business, yes. You've accumulated wealth and status. But when it comes to understanding what creates a meaningful life, when it comes to relationships that aren't transactional, when it comes to measuring success beyond spreadsheets, I'm realizing you might be the last person in this room qualified to judge." Complete silence descended on the table. No one in my entire life had spoken to my father this way. I reached for my phone and pulled up my analytics dashboard. "Since we're discussing metrics, let me share some of mine. My article last week reached 23,000 readers in 3 days. I received 412 emails from people saying it helped them make difficult decisions about their own careers." I scrolled to another screen. Emerging Voices Media has offered me a monthly column starting next month. It pays $3,000 per piece, which admittedly isn't Burton Marketing's salary, but it's just one revenue stream among several I'm building. My father's expression remained stony, but I noticed he was listening intently now. "The book proposal that was rejected. The editor personally reached out yesterday recommending me to a different publisher, whose focus better aligns with my concept. We're meeting next week." This last part wasn't entirely true. The editor had suggested I might try other publishers, but hadn't made a specific introduction. But in that moment, the small exaggeration felt justified against years of having my accomplishments minimized. So yes, by conventional metrics, I've taken a step back financially. But in terms of building something meaningful that aligns with my values, in creating work that actually matters to real people navigating their own difficult choices, I'm succeeding beyond what I ever did at Burton. I looked around at each family member. Success isn't a single fixed point. It's not just money or status or job titles. Those things matter, sure, but they are not the only things that matter. Jackson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That's convenient philosophy when you're not meeting conventional benchmarks. I turned to him with newfound confidence. Is it? Tell me honestly, Jackson, are you happy? Does your work fulfill you beyond the status and paycheck? Because from where I sit, you seem to be chasing Dad's approval with the same desperation I had for years. The difference is I finally realized that approval wasn't worth sacrificing my authentic self. My brother's face flushed, and I immediately regretted the direct attack. This wasn't about hurting him. It was about standing in my truth. "I'm not claiming I have everything figured out," I said more gently. "I'm learning and adjusting every day. But I know that measuring my worth by someone else's definition of success was slowly destroying me." My mother, who had remained silent throughout this exchange, surprised everyone by speaking up. "Thomas, perhaps Sophia has a point about different types of success. Not everyone finds fulfillment in the same path." My father turned to her with an expression of betrayal. "You're encouraging this impractical fantasy now, after she's thrown away years of education and career development." "I'm not throwing anything away," I interjected. "I'm applying my education and experience differently. My marketing background helps me build my platform. My business training helps me develop multiple revenue streams. I'm using everything I learned, just not in the way you planned." Amanda, who had been quietly observing, suddenly spoke. "Dad, Sophia's writing helped me decide to apply to art school when I was terrified you'd disapprove. Her courage to pursue her passion gave me permission to pursue mine. How is inspiring others not a form of success?" My father looked genuinely taken aback at this coordinated challenge to his authority. For perhaps the first time in family memory, his absolute certainty seemed to waver. "This isn't about rejecting everything you've taught us," I continued, softening my tone. "It's about expanding the definition of a successful life beyond financial metrics alone." The tension in the room was palpable. My father's jaw worked as he visibly struggled to reassert control over the conversation. "Pretty words don't change economic realities, Sophia. When your blog fails to pay the bills, what then? If this specific path doesn't work out, I'll adapt. I'll find another way to apply my talents authentically. What I won't do is return to a life that was slowly extinguishing my spirit, just to meet someone else's definition of success." My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This conversation has become unproductive. Clearly, you're not in a place to receive guidance or wisdom from those with more life experience." "Or maybe," I replied quietly, "I'm finally in a place to discern which guidance serves my authentic path and which serves someone else's vision for my life." He slammed his palm against the table, causing the silverware to jump. "Enough! I won't sit here and be lectured about success by someone who's abandoned every advantage she was given to chase adolescent fantasies." My mother reached for his arm. "Thomas, please. Let's just enjoy our dinner." He pulled away from her touch. "No, Diana. I've supported Sophia's education, opened doors for her career, provided every opportunity for success. And this is the thanks. Disrespect at my own table. Rejection of values that built everything she's benefited from." The familiar guilt rose within me, the lifetime of conditioning that linked my father's approval to my sense of worth. For a moment, I almost apologized, almost retreated to preserve the fragile peace. Instead, I took a deep breath and spoke from my center. "Dad, I'm genuinely grateful for the opportunities you've provided, but those opportunities came with invisible strings. The expectation that I would live according to your definition of success. I'm not rejecting you or our family. I'm choosing a path that honors my authentic gifts and values." "Authentic gifts," he repeated with derision. "Self-indulgent justification for avoiding real work and responsibility." The dinner was clearly over. My father's face had closed completely, his eyes cold with disappointment and anger. I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, challenged an authority that had never been challenged within our family system. "I think it's best if I go," I said, placing my napkin beside my plate and standing. "Thank you for dinner, Mom." "Running away when confronted with truth," my father noted. "Typical." "Actually," I replied, "I'm running toward truth for the first time. There's a difference." I walked toward the door, expecting no one to follow. To my surprise, Amanda stood as well. "I'll walk you out, Sophia." At the front door, my sister hugged me tightly. "That was both terrifying and the most amazing thing I've ever seen," she whispered. "Are you okay?" I realized with some surprise that I was. The confrontation I'd feared for months had finally happened, and I was still standing. More than that, I felt lighter, as if putting words to my truth had released a burden I'd carried for years. "I'm better than okay," I told her. "For the first time in maybe forever, I feel like I'm actually living my own life." As I drove away from my childhood home, I expected to feel grief or fear or regret. Instead, I felt an unexpected sense of liberation. The worst had happened. My father had declared me a failure, had withdrawn his approval completely, and yet I was still intact. His judgment no longer defined me. It was the first time I left that house feeling like a success, rather than a disappointment measured by standards that finally truly belonged to me. The aftermath of the dinner confrontation was both more difficult and more transformative than I could have imagined. The first few days brought a deafening silence from my family. No calls from my mother checking if I'd arrived home safely. No texts from Jackson with sarcastic commentary. Not even an update from Amanda about the fallout after my departure. I threw myself into my work with renewed determination, channeling the emotional intensity of the confrontation into my writing. The piece I wrote that week, "The Courage to Disappoint Finding Yourself Beyond Others' Expectations," resonated deeply with readers. Comments and emails flooded in from people sharing their own stories of breaking free from external definitions of success. "Your words gave me the courage to finally tell my parents I'm leaving medical school to pursue music," one reader wrote. "The weight that lifted from my shoulders was indescribable. I responded to every message recognizing that my personal struggle had touched a universal nerve. So many people lived with the crushing weight of others' expectations, sacrificing their authentic paths to meet standards they had never chosen for themselves." A week after the dinner, my phone finally lit up with a text from Amanda. "Mom's been crying. Dad's locked in his office more than usual. Jackson's drinking too much after work. But something's shifting. They're talking about you differently. Can we meet for coffee?" We met at a small cafe midway between our homes. Amanda looked tired, but somehow more present than I'd seen her in years. "It's like you broke some spell," she said, stirring her latte absently. "After you left, Mom actually disagreed with Dad. Like, openly. I've never seen that before." "What did she say?" I asked, surprised. "She told him he was being unreasonable and judgmental, that he was going to lose his daughter if he couldn't respect your choices. He didn't respond well, but she didn't back down like she usually does." I tried to imagine my mother standing up to my father and found it difficult to picture. She had spent decades adapting to his certainties, smoothing family conflicts with quiet compromises and redirections. "And Jackson?" I asked. Amanda smiled slightly. "That's the really interesting part. He got drunk after you left and started talking about how he's not sure he even wants to take over the company someday. Said he feels trapped by expectations too, but it's harder for him because he's actually succeeded at everything Dad wanted." "Golden handcuffs," I murmured. "Exactly. He's built his whole identity around being Dad's successful heir. He can't even imagine who he'd be without that role." I felt a new empathy for my brother. His smug superiority had always grated on me, but I was beginning to see it as armor protecting a deeper uncertainty. The next day, I received a surprising email from my mother. The subject line read simply, "Things I've never told you." "Dear Sophia," it began. "Your courage at dinner has forced me to examine my own choices and silences. I want you to know that before I met your father, I had dreams as big as yours. My architectural designs won university competitions. My professors encouraged me to apply for prestigious fellowships. I had plans to create sustainable community spaces that would transform how people lived and connected." She described how she had gradually surrendered those dreams after marriage, how each compromise seemed small until suddenly decades had passed, with her creativity expressed only in household management and dinner party arrangements. "I don't regret the family we built," she wrote, "but I regret showing you and Amanda that women should shrink their dreams to accommodate others. Your father isn't wrong about everything. Financial security matters. But watching you fight for your authentic path has awakened something in me. I've enrolled in a digital design course at the community college. It's a small step, but it's mine." The email ended with words that brought tears to my eyes. "I'm proud of you, Sophia. Not despite your choices, but because of them. Your courage is helping me find mine." 3 weeks after the dinner, I received my first major professional breakthrough. The editor who had rejected my book proposal connected me with a podcast producer looking for compelling personal narratives about career transitions and authentic success. After reviewing my blog, they invited me to speak at their upcoming conference on redefining success in the modern economy. It wasn't a huge financial opportunity, but the exposure to an audience of thousands represented exactly the platform-building opportunity I needed. When I shared the news on my blog, subscription numbers jumped 30% overnight. The night before the conference, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I answered cautiously. "Sophia, it's Jackson." His voice sounded different, less confident, more human than I was accustomed to hearing from my always poised brother. "Is everything okay? I asked, immediately concerned that something had happened to our parents. Yes, no, I don't know. He paused. Can we talk? Like, really talk without the usual family dynamics? We spoke for over 2 hours that night. For the first time, Jackson shared his doubts about the path he'd followed so diligently. He admitted envying my courage to step away from expectations. He confessed to panic attacks before board meetings, to drinking too much to manage the constant pressure of being Thomas Warren's son and heir. I'm good at the family business, he said, but I'm not sure it's what I would have chosen if I'd had a real choice. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, I replied. The hardest part was realizing I did have a choice all along. I just couldn't see it through Dad's expectations. I watched your talk online, he admitted, the one about authentic success metrics. It's been messing with my head ever since. I felt a strange reversal in our dynamic, my confident, accomplished brother seeking guidance from the family failure. What would you do if you could do anything? I asked him. Honestly, I'd stay in business, but I'd focus on sustainable ventures, environmental consulting, green tech innovations. Dad thinks it's all trendy nonsense with limited profit potential, but I see the future differently. By the time we hung up, something had healed between us. Not completely, but meaningfully. The competitive hierarchy that had defined our relationship since childhood had begun to transform into something more supportive, more authentic. My keynote speech at the conference was recorded and shared widely across professional networks. I spoke honestly about leaving traditional success metrics behind, about the courage required to disappoint others in order to honor yourself, about redefining success to include purpose and meaning alongside financial stability. The video was viewed over 100,000 times in the first week. Media outlets reached out for interviews about career transitions and authentic leadership. The publisher who had rejected my book proposal reached out again, interested in revisiting the concept with my expanded platform. 2 months after the confrontation at dinner, my phone rang with my father's number. I stared at the screen, my heart racing with conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to ignore it to protect the hard-won independence I'd established. Another part desperately hoped for reconciliation, for some acknowledgement that my path had value, even if it wasn't the one he would have chosen. I answered on the fourth ring. Sophia. His voice sounded older, less certain than I remembered. I saw your interview on the Business Innovation podcast. I waited, unsure how to respond. You were articulate, he continued awkwardly. Thoughtful. Your points about measuring the right metrics for personal success were thought-provoking. Coming from my father, this qualified as effusive praise. Thank you, I said simply. I wondered if you might be willing to meet. Just the two of us. Coffee, perhaps. The request surprised me. My father didn't do casual meetings, and he certainly didn't initiate reconciliation conversations. His approach to conflict had always been to maintain his position until others conceded to his superior wisdom. I'd like that, I replied, surprising myself with the truth of it. Despite everything, I did want to rebuild some kind of relationship with him, even if it would never be what it once was. We met at a quiet cafe the following Saturday. My father arrived precisely on time, dressed more casually than I was accustomed to seeing him. Khakis and a button-down rather than his usual suit. The small concession to informality seemed significant somehow. Your mother is taking architecture classes, he said after we'd ordered our coffee. Did you know? I nodded. She mentioned it in an email. I think it's wonderful. She's quite talented, always was. He stirred his coffee with uncharacteristic uncertainty. I'm not sure I fully appreciated that before. The admission, small as it was, represented a seismic shift in my father's typical certainty. Sophia, I'm not good at this, he said finally. Admitting I might have been wrong goes against everything I've built my life around. Certainty, conviction, clear direction. These have been my strengths in business and family. I waited, giving him space to continue in his own way. Your speech, the one that's been shared everywhere. You said something that kept me awake for several nights. He cleared his throat. The metrics we use to measure success determine what we value and what we sacrifice. Choose the wrong metrics, and you might win at a game that costs you everything that matters. I remembered writing those words, feeling their truth deeply. I've been thinking about my metrics, he continued, about what I've measured in my life and what I've overlooked, about what I've gained and what I've sacrificed. He looked up at me directly, about who I've sacrificed. Dad, he held up his hand. Please let me finish while I have the courage. I built a successful business. I provided financial security for our family. These aren't small accomplishments, and I'm proud of them. As you should be, I agreed. But I missed other metrics entirely. I measured your success by your adherence to my vision rather than your alignment with your authentic gifts. I valued compliance over courage. I prioritized financial achievement over personal fulfillment. He looked older, suddenly more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. I'm not saying I was wrong about everything. Financial security matters. Strategic thinking matters. But they're not the only things that matter. He paused. You helped me see that, though I fought it hard. I never meant to reject everything you taught me, I said carefully, just to integrate it with my own truth. Your mother said something similar. He smiled slightly. She's become quite philosophical lately. Says she's learning to honor the architect she set aside decades ago. We talked for nearly 3 hours that day, having the first real conversation of our adult relationship. He didn't completely understand or endorse my choices, but he was making a genuine effort to see beyond his own perspective. It was more than I had ever expected. As we prepared to leave, he asked hesitantly about my upcoming book project, information he must have gotten from Amanda or my mother. The publisher wants a manuscript by next spring, I told him. It's terrifying and exhilarating. He nodded thoughtfully. If you need someone to review the business sections, the parts about career transition and professional reinvention, I'd be willing to offer feedback. Only if it's helpful, of course. The offer represented an olive branch, an acknowledgement of my path, while offering support in the way he knew best. I'd appreciate that, I said, meaning it. 6 months after that fateful family dinner, my life had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. My writing career had gained legitimate traction with regular columns in 2 online publications, a book contract with a respected publisher, and speaking engagements at conferences focused on career transformation and authentic leadership. The financial stability my father had worried about was gradually solidifying. While I wasn't earning my former corporate salary yet, my multiple income streams were growing steadily. More importantly, I woke each morning with purpose and engagement, rather than the dull dread that had characterized my corporate years. The most significant changes, however, were in my relationships with my family. My mother and I spoke weekly, having honest conversations that had never been possible in the carefully controlled atmosphere of my childhood. She shared her rediscovered passion for architectural design, sending me sketches of community spaces she was developing in her classes. I sent her drafts of my writing, receiving thoughtful feedback that reflected her own journey toward authentic expression. I've spent decades managing a household with precision, she told me during one call. Now I'm learning to apply that same attention to detail, to designs that might actually impact communities. It's terrifying and wonderful. My relationship with Amanda deepened from supportive siblings to genuine friends and creative allies. We met regularly to discuss our respective projects, offering feedback and encouragement that came from true understanding of each other's challenges. You should see Dad at my gallery openings now, she told me, laughing. He actually asks questions about my artistic process instead of just identifying potential clients in the room. It's weird, but nice. Even Jackson and I had established a new dynamic. Our lifelong competition had evolved into something more collaborative as he began exploring sustainable business models within our father's company. I'm introducing green initiatives gradually, he explained during one of our now regular lunch meetings. Dad's skeptical but willing to let me prove the business case. It's the first time I've championed something he didn't already believe in. My father remained the most complex relationship in my life. Our coffee meeting had been the first of several conversations, each progressively more honest than the last. He didn't transform overnight into a different person. His belief in traditional success metrics remained strong, his personality still dominant and certain. But small cracks had appeared in his absolute authority, allowing glimpses of a more nuanced human being beneath the patriarch persona. In May, 6 months after the confrontation, my parents hosted another family dinner. I accepted the invitation with only mild apprehension, curious to see how our family dynamic had evolved. The physical setting was unchanged. The same formal dining room, the same expensive china, the same perfectly prepared meal. But the emotional atmosphere had shifted perceptibly. My mother spoke more freely, offering opinions rather than just support. Jackson mentioned frustrations with certain clients rather than presenting an unbroken narrative of success. Amanda discussed the commercial viability of her art without apologizing for its creative integrity. My father still dominated many conversations, but with subtle differences. He asked more questions, listened more attentively, held his judgments more lightly. When the conversation turned to my recent speaking engagement at a major media conference, he asked about audience response rather than immediately questioning the financial compensation. "Your definition of success has expanded my thinking," he admitted during dessert, a remarkable statement from a man who had spent decades believing his thinking needed no expansion. "I still believe financial metrics matter, but I'm learning there are other valid measurements." Later, as we gathered in the living room, my father asked if I would read an excerpt from my upcoming book. The request stunned me into momentary silence. Throughout my childhood and young adulthood, my writing had been dismissed as an impractical hobby never worthy of family attention. "I'd love to," I said, recovering quickly. I read a passage about redefining failure, how our greatest growth often emerges from our most painful setbacks, how resilience builds through challenge rather than continuous success, how the courage to risk failure ultimately enables our most meaningful achievements. When I finished, the room remained quiet for several moments. My father cleared his throat. "You've become a powerful writer," he said simply. The acknowledgement, so long sought and now finally offered, washed over me with surprising emotion. But I realized something even more surprising: I no longer needed his approval the way I once had. His recognition felt good, certainly, but my sense of worth no longer hinged on his assessment. "Thank you," I replied. "That means a lot coming from you. But I've also learned that my value doesn't depend on external validation, even from people I love and respect." He nodded slowly, a faint smile suggesting he recognized the healthy boundary I was establishing. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the long journey from that devastating dinner 6 months earlier to this moment of tentative new beginning. The path hadn't been linear or easy. There had been difficult conversations, painful revelations, awkward adjustments, as we all learned to relate to each other differently. My father would never fully understand or embrace my choices. My brother would always carry some of our father's values more deeply than I did. My mother would continue working through decades of suppressed ambitions, and I would keep navigating the challenging, rewarding path of authentic success I had chosen. But something fundamental had shifted in our family system. The unquestioned authority had been questioned. The absolute definitions had been challenged. The rigid roles had become more fluid. And in that new flexibility, we were all finding more room to breathe, to grow, to become more fully ourselves while remaining connected. The journey of defining success on my own terms continued to evolve. Some days brought brilliant clarity and confirmation. Others brought doubt and financial uncertainty. The writing career I had chosen required constant adaptation, persistent effort, and regular reinvention. But each morning when I sat down at my desk, I felt a deep alignment between my work and my values that no corporate salary had ever provided. Each time a reader wrote to say, my words had given them courage to make a difficult change, I experienced a satisfaction that transcended any performance review or bonus check. Success, I had learned, wasn't a fixed destination, but a continuing journey of alignment, bringing our outer lives into harmony with our inner truth, our daily choices into congruence with our deepest values. The metrics that mattered weren't just financial, though sustainability remained important. They included purpose, integrity, connection, growth, and the courage to remain true to oneself, even when facing judgment or disapproval. Perhaps the most profound lesson emerged from that painful dinner confrontation. Sometimes our greatest failures by external standards become our most important successes in authentic living. My father's judgment, "You're a failure for life," had inadvertently liberated me from the prison of seeking his approval. In failing, according to his metrics, I had finally succeeded in claiming my own. Have you ever had to redefine what success means in your own life? Has someone else's judgment ever pushed you to find your own authentic path? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please subscribe, and share with someone who might need encouragement to define success on their own terms. Thank you for joining me in this story. And remember, the only true failure is abandoning your authentic self to live someone else's definition of success.